The story begins with the boy Ars, a simple young man with no experience in anything. He returned from work and everything was fine. The next day, he woke up and went to work again, but he felt something strange. Yes, he put his hand on his heart and suddenly his sense disappeared completely. He suffered a cardiac arrest and died instantly. But suddenly, he finds himself opening his eyes again, thinking he's in the hospital, and that's his nurse. But what is it? Why is there a flying dog in the room? Is he dreaming or what? Soon our hero realizes that he has moved to another world. When he looks at himself in the mirror, he discovers that he has become a small child who understands nothing about life. He soon learns that he has been reborn in this world, and it looks like he will turn the situation upside down. 3 years pass, during which time he learns to read and write, living a luxurious life, surrounded by servants and guards everywhere. Luckily for him, he was born in the kingdom of Asimur, specifically in a town called Darien, which is ruled by his father, and he is the ruler of the town. Over time, Ars descends into the training ground to follow the soldiers training himself. Meanwhile, he observes 2 soldiers training together, but one clearly assaults the other. Ars looks at him and activates his mysterious ability. Here we discover that he has the ability to evaluate, which enables him to determine the level of skills of anyone in front of him and to know his strengths and weaknesses. Ars discovers that this soldier is not talented in close combat, but he is very skilled in using a bow and arrows. He goes to him and tells him, "Why don't you try using a bow?" The soldier hesitates at first because he has never used a bow before, but decides to try it based on Ars's words. When it aims at the target, the arrow is fired and hit with extreme precision. Repeat the experiment again and hit the target again. The soldiers gather around him in amazement, shouting to him, "Oh my God!" When someone asks, "How did you know he was talented in archery?" Ars replies with a smile, "Just a feeling." After a while, Ars has lunch with his father, Governor Raven, who admires his ability to discover talent, but warns him that the coming days will be difficult, as the kingdom may enter many wars and conflicts. He is asked to prepare well for this stage, and Ars responds with approval. One day, while wandering around town, Ars notices a young man lying on the ground while being bullied by others. He discovers that this boy is from the race of the 2 kings, a race treated as slaves and sold in the markets. Getting angry, Ars approaches him and gives him food, then discovers that his name is Rhett. As soon as Ars uses his power, he is shocked. He saw supernatural abilities, perhaps the second most powerful he had ever seen after his father. After Rhett eats, he tries to leave, but Ars rushes after him, tells him that he is Governor Raven's son, and wants to make him his vassal. Rhett refuses at first, but when Ars promises him that he will get the food he dreams of if he joins him, he changes his mind and accepts. When Ars asks his father to allow Rhett to live in the palace, the ruler strongly refuses, especially when he learns that he is of the race of the 2 kings. But Ars insists that Rhett has terrifying abilities, and one day he may be as powerful as his father. The governor quipped, "This is nonsense. I'll test it myself, and if he can touch me just once, I'll let him join us. But if it fails, I don't want to see it again." Ars agrees to the challenge, confident that Rhett will succeed despite the huge difference in strength between them. The fight begins. Raven attacks hard, while Rhett tries to dodge his blows but realizes he's facing a real monster. Rhett takes a blow that knocks him down, but he looks at Ars and remembers his confidence in him, and he stands up again, showing unprecedented determination. He attacks with all his might, and with a sudden blow he manages to hit a hair from Raven's head. In doing so, he passes the test, and the ruler recognizes his talent, and even praises Arce's ability to discover talent. After a period of training and study, Ars tells his friend Rhett about the history of the kingdom, and how it was originally 7 countries that were unified by King Asimuref, but he died, and his son took over the rule despite being just an 8-year-old child, which made a group of thieves control the kingdom's decisions. Ars knows that the kingdom will soon collapse, so he decides to gather a group of talented people around him in preparation for that day. Rhett suggests they walk around town in search of talented individuals. While wandering, Ars hears a man calling him out at the market, offering to buy rare dragon eggs at a fantastic price. Ars is about to accept, but Rhett intervenes, puts his dagger on the seller's neck, and tells him, "You're a crook. No one like you can have that number of dragon eggs. Also, real dragon eggs do not contain these stains. These are just giant lizard eggs." Rhett tries to punish him, but Ars stops him and takes him away. Later, while wandering through the market, he is robbed by a mysterious nice person. But Rhett quickly chases him and catches him, only to discover that he is a beautiful girl. But she runs to an alleyway, and they follow her, only to find that she is surrounded by a gang of criminals beating her. Ars intervenes in anger, but a gangster tries to attack him, and Rhett confronts him easily, then pounces on the rest of the gang like a ninja, and kills them with quick blows. At this moment, Ars does his ability again, but is stunned. The abilities of this girl are not normal at all, but exceed all expectations, despite her young age. Ars asks her to join them, but she refuses, saying, "I'd rather die than be a follower of a spoiled child like you, Ars." He kept trying to convince her that he was willing to do anything for her to agree, and indeed she told him, "I agree, but on the condition you have to remove the rich people's contempt for people like me. Stop looking at us as slaves, and most importantly, eliminate street hunger." She took out the money and threw it at them, saying, "Take this money and get out of here quickly." Ars said to her, "But people have been beating you a little while ago, and I'm worried about you." She told him that a nobleman had kidnapped her and wanted to sell her, but she managed to escape from him, causing him to send criminals after her to return her to him. At this moment, a group of orphans ran towards her, and we learned that her name was Jane, and that she was caring for these children and fighting the hunger that could kill them at any moment. Ars was deeply moved and gave her all the money he had, saying, "I hope you take her, and we will surely meet again." Upon returning to the palace, he sat alone feeling very sad for Jane and the children living on the street. Rhett tried to relieve him, but suddenly they heard a voice calling out to them. Yes, it was the kids who were with Jane, and they came to ask for his help, as they learned that the gang had arrested Jane again, and it seems that this will indeed be the end of it. She was taken to the gang leader's house, thrown to the ground, and the gang members began to mock her and brutally beat her. Jane couldn't even move from her place. Then the gang leader said, "Stop hitting her face, this will reduce her price." Jane tried to take her money and run away, but they beat her again and threw her to the ground again. She remembered the orphaned children, but she couldn't do anything. Same to you. Do you think this is the end of it? Suddenly, the door shattered above their heads, and Ars appeared in the place. One of the gang members tried to attack Rhett, but easily eliminated him, and then completely destroyed the gang. Ars then turned to the gang leader and told him, "Either you let Jane go, or you'll regret it." When the leader realized that Ars was the son of a nobleman, he was frightened and said to him, "Why defend her? People like you buy and torture them just for fun." Even Jane seemed surprised, telling him, "Why would you put your life at risk for me? I don't understand what you're doing." Ars said to her, "Don't worry, we're not like them. Don't be afraid for me. Nothing will happen to me." Then he turned to Rhett and said to him, "Eliminate them." Rhett couldn't believe what he heard, so he set out to kill the gang without hesitation. Two tried to attack him with the magic of fire, but he turned into a ghost among them and immediately wiped them out. The boss of the gang realized that it had become dangerous, so he summoned their most powerful criminal and told him, "If you get rid of them, I will give you big money." Jane was scared of the criminal, but Ars reassured her, "Don't worry, we're safe." The criminal stupidly attacked Rhett, but suddenly disappeared and then reappeared, eliminating their most powerful criminal easily. The leader was horrified and said, "The governor of the city allows the slave trade. I don't understand why you are doing this." Ars said to him quietly, "Simple. Take this money and consider that I bought it." Rhett then told the leader, "You have two choices. Either you take the money and don't tell anyone what happened, or I'll cut off your tongue to make sure you never speak again." The leader was terrified and said, "Without money too? I agree." Ars then went to Jane and took her with him. Along the way, Jane chose different paths so no one would recognize them. They reached the city limits, and the place was very desolate. Rhett took out a magic tool, then said to Jane, "Try using your magical skills." She said, "But I've never used magic before, and I don't even know how to start." Rhett replied, "Well, I'll teach you some spells. Now try them." Indeed, Jane began to cast the spell. A vortex of flames broke out in the place, and suddenly a huge explosion shook the entire city. Ars and Rhett were shocked, and no one believed what had happened in front of him. Jane was very happy. At the time, Jane asked Ars, "Will you provide me with food and shelter now that I have joined you?" Ars said to her, "Yes, and you will also get a salary." But Jane refused, saying, "I don't want a salary. I just want you to send any money to the orphan children. They have no one but me to take care of them." She then thanked him for everything he had done for her and promised him that she would do her best to help him. When they arrived at the mansion, Raven met them at the door, and when he saw Jin, he refused to let her in, saying, "What is this? Do you intend to include a vagabond in our team?" Ars then asked him to see Jane her power, and she showed off her magic in front of him. When he saw her incredible power, he told her, "Your room is inside, on the right." Years passed. 3 years later, Raven came back from a battle, telling them, "We won thanks to Jane." Yes, the girl has grown up. Her strength has evolved into a super imaginative, and her presence in the team has turned the tide of any battle. We also learned that Ars now has twin brothers. At that time, Reet called Ars and told him that there was a family of very skilled fishermen on the border of the village. Ars was very happy, and he took Rhett and Jane with him, and they went to them quickly. Suddenly, they saw a pig running around, and then one of the arrows hit it, and it was hunted. The two hunters ran towards them to apologize, as the arrows were not supposed to be fired in the presence of people nearby. Ars looked at them and realized that they were exactly the target they wanted, the family of fishermen he was looking for. He went with them to their house, where their father gave them food, and was very happy that Ars, the son of the village governor, had come to them. Ars wasted no time, but asked them to join his team to become village soldiers. The father was very happy and said to his children, "Finally, your dream has come true." By the way, the one on the right is called Mark, who is the eldest, and the one in the middle is called Atos, who is the younger brother. Then the father tells Lars, "I'm really proud of you despite your age. You are talented and strive to preserve the village, unlike Zane." And when he asks him, "Who is this?" he replies that he has a younger son who is almost the same age as him, but he is a failure, a coward, and has no pride. At that time, Zane enters to greet them, and he is very shy. As usual, Ars does the assessment skill on him, and he asks, "What exactly is this?" His strategic skills have reached the rank of S despite his young age, but his intelligence is beyond imagination. Ars is surprised and asks Zane to join them as well. So the young man thinks that he will enter into wars and fights, as he is afraid of his imagination in the first place. So he refuses, and runs hiding in his room, closing the door on himself. The father then apologizes to Lars and tells him that Zane has always been introverted and has been sitting alone since his mother's death, and that, unlike his brothers, he is a failure and a coward. Ars tells him, "Shut up. You don't understand anything. Your son has a talent that deserves full respect." He enters Zane's room and tries to talk to him. The young man is scared at first, but Ars notices that he likes to read, so he tells him that if he joins them, he will take him to their palace library, which contains all the books he wishes. Zane says to him, "Okay," and in fact he takes them and goes home, and then says to Jane, "After that, take Mark and Atos to the training place," while he takes Zane and takes him to the library and tells him, "Live, teacher, and if you need anything, let Rhett." After a while, he returns to him again, and to his surprise, Zane lies on the ground. After finishing reading a large number of books, Ars activates the assessment skill and observes something very strange. Zane's abilities have increased in just a few hours, and the boy, he understands nothing. Ars stands with Rhett and Jane and says, "I want to prove Zane's abilities to his family, specifically to his father." "What you want?" he replies. "A very amazing idea." Ars gathers everyone in the forest and says to Zane, "I want you to hunt us some animals, but without weapons." Zane says, "Okay," while his brothers remain shocked. It wasn't long before we saw the greatness. The father finds one of the strategic traps has been set in the place, and a huge number of animals have been hunted. In addition to Zane placed herbs to keep mothers and young from falling into the trap for the sake of ecological balance, and also designed places that allow the young to get out of the trap in case any child enters by mistake. And this is exactly what happens when genius and creativity come together. The father stands shocked and does not believe that Zane is whoever did it. But contrary to expectations, his father does not express any reaction, telling Lars, "I hope you take them and come back again. Be careful with them," and then leaves them and leaves. What exactly is the story? And why was the father's action strange? At that time, Zane is so sad that he goes to lock himself in his room and reflect on his painful memories. On the other hand, we see the father standing on the roof with Mark and Atos, and when asked why, he replies, he always treated Zane badly, and despite being a father, he could not discover his son's skills or stand by him, and I feel very negligent. I can't even look him in the eye. Of course, Zane listened to all these words and was deeply moved, knowing how remorseful his father was. The next day, it's time to leave, as the older brothers say goodbye to their father to leave. Zane comes out second, but he doesn't say goodbye to anyone present. And suddenly he comes back and talks to his father while he is cutting wood, saying, "You never fell short with me, but you didn't give me the opportunity to prove myself, and I promise to make you extremely proud of me." When the father hears these words, he is very moved and bids farewell to his son as well. At that time, the brothers gather and thank Ars very much, promising him that they will do what they can to help him. Years pass, Ars has grown up, King Raven is tired, and we know that they will get into battle within the next 2 days, because the town's governor is dead. The king is not such a thing, but the governor, and what is important is that the ruler abdicated to his youngest son from the rule, and despite the approval of the eldest son, Some villains have caused strife and ignited a war between them. The neighboring town is helping, and it is impossible for corrupt rulers to send their soldiers for the purpose of occupation. Raven wanted to extinguish the flames of war in this way, but suddenly he gave up all of that and told Ars, "I want you to prepare yourself for your speeches." Ars replies, "There is no time for that right now. The world is on fire, and it seems that you are about to say goodbye. Prepare yourself, son. No more time," says Raven, and he agreed with the nobleman to send his daughter to the palace so that she could get to know Ars. The young man rushes into the team saying he has a big problem, and when they know that Raven wants to get engaged, they rejoice in him. Suddenly, the maid reports the arrival of the bride's procession, and in fact he goes out to receive her outside, and frankly finds her like a daughter of the moon. For example, her name is Lisa. When Ars activates the assessment skill on her, a voice appears indicating that the girl has high diplomatic abilities and is not the worst ambassador, but he doubts her intentions and thinks about who exercises authority over her. Lisa talks to Ars in a very nice way, and then they sit down to eat together. She thanks him for the warm reception and hospitality and asks him to walk with her outside the town. When he tells her it's raining and she thinks she can't go out, she tells him, "Count to 3, and suddenly the rain stops and the sun rises again. Ars is surprised and thinks that Lisa is controlling the weather, but later discovers that it was raining when it came, and when she saw the clouds, she was able to calculate the time of the rain disappearing accurately and brilliantly. Later they go out for walks together in the village, and suddenly we find two people embracing, and at the same time Zane and Jane reach them, and Jane wants to solve the problem in her own way, but Lisa prevents her, so she goes to them and solves the problem completely in less than seconds, which amazes Ars. After the day is over, they come home, and that night Lisa says to him, "If I ask you a question, would you answer honestly?" He replies, "Absolutely," and then asks him, "What is the main reason why you might love the one in front of you?" He gets a little confused, but answers, "The thing that makes me love the one in front of me the most is not to be a liar, not to hide anything from me," because he still doubts her. Lisa says to him, "I promise I won't hide anything from you." Then you let go and go. In the evening, he goes into his room to sleep, and when he lifts the lid, he finds Lisa in front of him, and he gets a little scared and screams, and she tells him, "Calm down. I wouldn't have been able to sleep if I hadn't asked you another question." She pours him tea and says, "Give me what you have," and then continues, "I want to know your opinion honestly," because she's sure something went wrong and can't understand why he behaved with her this way. Here, Ars admits to her the truth, saying that he can in a certain way discover the skills of others, and that her skill in diplomacy is beyond imagination, but he cannot determine whether she acted from her heart or used it for a particular end. Lisa rejoices and tells him, "I promise you will completely change your mind about her," expressing her feelings for him and admiration for his intelligence, stressing that he will have a bright future. Then she marries him first, then leaves him and goes on her way. After a while, he returns home, while Ars communicates with her. Through the letters, he shows his attachment to her and seems to have fallen in love with her. Ars and his team then meet with Raven, whose health is deteriorating at a time when he tells them that the governor of Mesan is about to die and that the war will flare up within days. It should be noted that the province to which their village belongs, and more importantly, all the villages and cities in the kingdom of Mesan, will be divided into two groups. One supports the elder brother, the other supports the younger brother, while Raven believes that the elder brother is to rule. The elders of the cities are scheduled to hold a meeting soon in which they must attend, but Raven feels exhausted and is gripped by the disease. After a while, the governor of Kenry sends a letter setting the date for the meeting, and Ars decides to take Brett and Zane and attend the meeting on behalf of his father. When he arrives in Cannery, in front of the castle, the soldier who sees the invitation is astonished. "A child like you, what brought you here?" After entering the castle, the lieutenant governor meets them. Ars activates the assessment skill and realizes how adept he is at planning and making decisions, and that this deputy was the most suitable place for him. When Ars enters the base of the meeting, he finds two city governors, and he feels nervous at first, but settles down when the man shows a good side and gives it to him, saying, "Finally, I have grown up and are attending meetings." On the other hand, the barrel-like man could not tolerate Ars at all. Then the governor of the city of Canary, named Anumir, enters to thank them for coming and tells them that they must be fully prepared starting today, as a war will break out in the region within days, and they must control it and defend their people, in addition to supporting the elder brother in taking over the affairs of the kingdom of Mesan. Then the meeting ended, and we found Governor Anumir standing in front of Ars, reassuring him of Raven's health, saying that he was proud of him and his team, and that they would make a big difference on the next battlefield. And then he was gone. But that was not in the presence of the man who could not bear Ars, and I will tell you why. At first he is Lisa's father, and when Ars found out, out, he was shocked. He said to him, "I am wrong because I trusted you. My daughter became depressed because of you, and I sent you messages for several days without showing any interest." Ars replied, "I was writing a letter to send her, but I had to stop because of the problems that hindered me from my father's illness, wars, meetings, and other problems." The man added, "Lisa got attached to you a lot, so take care of her," then left him and left. When Ars returned home, he sat down with Raven to brief him on what had happened at the meeting, and he was very proud. After a while, we found Ars and Rit training together, and during the training, Ret admitted that Ars is a bit weak. He only has the skill of evaluation and no other, because he is very afraid of any fight, even if it is only training, which he may lose in the next battle. At that moment, Zayn received a letter from Governor Anumir, ordering him to move the soldiers immediately, because the neighboring province of Said began sending soldiers to take control of a city in Maysan province. We found Ars unable to hold his nerves, seemingly frightened beyond imagination. He gathered the soldiers at the training ground and told them that he would move immediately and that he would be the commander of the battle. But Raven reached them and told him, "You will not participate in the war, and if you want to prove that you are a man ready for combat, I will put you to the test now." He ordered the soldiers to bring in a dangerous criminal accused of theft, rape, and murder, who was sentenced to death, and told them that if he could watch the sentence be carried out without losing his temper, they would win the battle with him. Indeed, the execution began, and suddenly the criminal's neck deviated from its course, and Ars entered a state of nausea and completely lost his concentration from the scene in front of him. So he collapsed on the ground without being able to move. His father said to him, "Yes, this is what I was talking about. The scene of death will surround you from all sides in battle, so you cannot come with us, teacher." And then he took the soldiers and left. Then the team went to Ars, but Raven called out to them, saying, "Come with me." And later everyone went to the battlefield, where Raven showed remarkable prowess in combat and shot down enemies one by one. And Ret joined him, while Jane was wreaking havoc in the place with her deadly charm. And Zen returned to present the archers, suddenly killing a huge number of enemy soldiers, and they won brilliantly. Unfortunately, Raven's condition deteriorated sharply until he fainted, and the team had to return home immediately. After a while, Ars went to check on his father, and Ret told him that he was fighting with all his might, which negatively affected his health. But, on the contrary, he told him, "Fine." And then upon his awakening, he told them that he would go down to the training ground, and then he left. "If I were brave enough, I would have led the soldiers in his place," Ars said to himself, blaming himself as if to blame himself, and he continued to receive blows. At that moment, Lisa arrived to check on Ars and Raven, and she was very worried. Ret told her what had happened from the beginning, and that Ars felt weak when they went to battle and left them alone, in addition to feeling guilty for Raven and taking full responsibility. She didn't know he was on the training ground, so she went there to check on him, but she found him training with all his strength, and yet he would say, "As long as I'm weak, I can't protect the one I love." On the other hand, we learned that Raven recovered his health and summoned the whole team, saying, "I don't talk to you as a governor, I talk to you as a father," and then said, "Ars is not strong enough to fight any fight, and I hope that you will stay by his side until the end, and support and protect him no matter what, because I will not talk long." The team was very moved, and they replied, "Okay." When he learned that Lisa was out, Ars sent her a letter recommending himself, saying, "Despite my abilities, I am still very weak, but having you by my side will definitely make a difference with me." And Lisa began to cry and told him, "Ars, you do everything to be like your father and more, and I promise you that I will never abandon you." When asked if she liked Ars, she replied, "Yes." At that time, Ars suddenly walked in on him carrying several books and herbs, saying, "I have found your cure for your condition." But Raven told him, "I'm fine. Just sit next to me. I want to talk to you a little." His father said to him, "When I was your age, I used to live a life that did not inherit it. The governor of the village imposed taxes on us by force, so I fled to a city where the situation was different and people lived with joy, and the ruler was a good and strong person, and this encouraged me to become one of his soldiers. And soon I proved my skills and promoted, and I became a private village under my rule, and its people knew everything about it, so I advised them to preserve and protect it at all costs." At that moment, Ars knew that the end was near, so he spent the night with his father quietly, and as expected, Raven released his last breath and lay in peace. The people of the village gathered and said goodbye to Ars, who wept in sorrow over the separation, but he gathered his nerves and announced to all those present that he would continue his father's journey and that he would protect the village until the last breath of his life. So all the villagers stood with him and supported him on this decision. Zayn also cried and remembered how much Raven treated him like a son, so that Jane conjured up her memories and how much Raven cared about her, and she considered considered him her father. Everyone was moved, but they supported Ars and promised him that they would stay by his side and never abandon him. At that time, they declared Ars governor of the village in place of the deceased Raven, and on the other hand, Anumir held a second meeting to mourn Raven's death and install Ars as official governor. Anumir then told them, "The war has actually begun. From here we move to Mason province, where they are currently located, and in a constant dispute between the elder brother and the younger brother over assuming power. The region includes a huge number of cities and villages. The younger brother has dominated the north, which appears in sky in front of you, while the elder brother controls the south, which appears in green. However, in one village, which is supposed to be an extension point in case, the attack on the north began. By the way, its name is the village of Bryn, but for some reason they turned against us, so we must join them by force. However, Ars had a different opinion and asked Anumir to give him a grace period to investigate the matter first before using force. Indeed, Anumir agreed and sat down with his team. And we know that Zane doubts a very dangerous secret. So he tells Ars, we have to gather all the information from inside the village. And Rit asks him, very simple, I know a group of mercenaries called the Shadow, and we can assign them the task in exchange for money. Ars was impressed and said, okay. The next day, we found them walking in the streets. And we know that Ars has established an orphanage of the highest standard, and Jane visits the children there constantly and gives charity with a large part of the care salary of the home. Everyone will be happy with this achievement. Suddenly, someone heard him calling Ars, and it turned out that Lisa had come to greet him, and she was very happy with the house and kept playing with the children all day. In the evening, Ars sat down with Lisa, and they told her that she had to leave because Ars had an appointment with the Shadow Mercenary Group, assigning them one of the missions. Lisa replied, okay, when do we walk? Ars replied, from now on, I'm with you wherever you go. Even if you're going to Mars, I won't leave you. The next day, they took some of them and arrived at a bar in the north of the city to meet the Shadow Group. Rhett told them that the old leader of the group had died, and that there was a new leader who was said to be stronger than the previous one, so they should be very careful. Finally, they arrive at the bar, and when the man tells them that the place is finished, Rhett tells him the password, and he is allowed to enter, and we notice how dangerous the place is. Ars said, sure, their leader has the highest abilities, and he activated the evaluation skill on him, but he couldn't determine. Suddenly, a girl came and said to them, what are you drinking? Ars was surprised and said to himself, this is higher than the highest skills I have seen in my life. He is the leader of the Shadow Group. So Ars paid attention and stood to wash his face to reduce his tension, and suddenly he was fixed in the room. Then the leader of the Shadow appeared as a boy at the end and said to him, how did you know I was the leader of the group despite all the disguise? Suddenly, the Shadow Commander's dagger was hit, and Rhett intervened to save Ars at the last minute, and Lisa walked in saying, I think that after you are exposed, you should carry out Ars's mission completely. The Shadow Commander smiled and said, I have a second plan. I can eliminate you all without anyone noticing. And Rhett replied, simple, uncle. In front of you. It's over. It's already difficult for us, and he wants us to get rid of it. The commander said, I first want to know how Ars revealed me, and that's when they learned that Ars had the skill of evaluation, and therefore was able to detect him easily. Lisa also learned from Ars that this was the leader, and when she was afraid, she informed Rhett of it. When asked to gather information about the village of Brian, the commander said, very simple. In exactly 5 days, I will gather all the information about this village for you. Ars was impressed, and 5 days later, Ars and Rhett went to the leader, whose name we know was X, and he said to him, well, you've done the job. They learned that he not only did the job personally, but also managed to obtain a very dangerous document from inside the governor's house, and he told them, and when Ars opened it, he found that it bore the seals of the cities and villages supporting the younger brother. Look to the right, said X, and Ars Rhett was amazed, as this was the seal of Massa, our biggest ally, and their presence with us would completely determine the fate of the war, as Massa has the greatest power in the region, which means that Massa is betraying them, and therefore the village of Breen refused to join Big Brother. Of course, if soldiers are sent to the village, the city of Massa will strike a fatal blow against them, and the massacre will begin. At the same time, thanking X for his effort, he took Rhett and Zane and went to Anumir and handed him the document, and they read the story and found out that they had been betrayed. Anumir then saluted Ars for his intelligence and tremendous effort, and handed the document to his deputy. Suddenly, the deputy said that the document was genuine, and all the seals were original except for the stamp of Massa, as an old stamp belonging to the city of Massa came and compared them, and they concluded that the younger brother had deceived the governor of the village of Breen to join him. The biggest surprise was that village contains explosive stones, and these stones possess a destructive power beyond imagination. Here Zane told them that the village of Brian should know that they had been deceived. The village governor asked, "But how?" And Zane replied easily, "It's very simple. After some time, we found ours accompanied by 2 representatives before the governor of Breen, who stated that the village of Raven wanted to announce its joining the younger brother because they heard that the city of Massa had joined him and that it was not important who won the government. They ensure an alliance with the strongest." The governor of Breen replied, "That's good, even though you're young, but you're very competent." Ars asked, "Are you sure that Massa has already joined the younger brother?" And the governor hesitated and doubted, asking to order the soldiers to attack them. Suddenly, Red intervened, and Ars told the governor, "Wait a minute, I'll check if Massa really joined the younger brother." We go back with a flashback, where we learn that Zane had taken Ars and they went to Massa, where they met the governor, also known as Kim. They discovered that his seal was being forged, and Kim came angry with them and said, "I'll come with you. That's enough." Then we returned, and Kim confirmed that the seal was forged, and that it was impossible for him to join the younger brother at all, and threatened the governor of Bryn from the heart of his palace, saying, but Ars intervened. "Although I made a mistake, you have a chance to prove your loyalty, prevent the export of explosive stones, and declare that you will join us immediately." After some time, we found Ars standing at Raven's grave, telling him what had happened in detail. "I missed you so much, and I will never disappoint you." Zane and Rit then arrived to check on him, and Ars said to them, "Without you, I wouldn't have been able to do anything, thank you." They were surprised by the presence of Anamir, who was visiting his friend Raven, and he informed Ars that the older brother, whose name was Dan, had heard what you had done and demanded to meet you as well. Ars was confused and nervous, but suddenly his friends came to encourage him, so he regained his courage and said, "Okay." Later, Ars and Reet and Zane took a car and drove to Dan Castle. They learned that King Dan held a large ceremony that brought together all the rulers of the towns and villages of the province. Ars reached the limits of the castle, and the place was wonderful. As he entered, everyone looked at him in amazement because he was a young man. Ars was very confused, but suddenly he found Anamir welcoming him, and rushed to him and greeted him. And Anamir began. Ars is introduced to the people as the governor of the village of Raven, and Ars regained his self-confidence and some of his joy. Meanwhile, everyone stopped because King Dan went out to receive them. Then Dan came out, and he was so luxurious, and when Ars put the assessment skill on him, he said, "How can these abilities be higher than the highest abilities I've ever seen?" Dan then welcomes them and gives a motivational speech to the rulers, telling them that he will declare Maysan an independent kingdom after winning the war against his brother Mark Jr. Everyone encouraged him to do so. Suddenly, King Ars called out to Ars and said, "Come by my side here." And Ars was a little confused, but his friends pushed him towards him. When the king approached, he thanked him very much and praised his mighty intelligence and his ability to discover the deception of his brother Mark the Little, and asked everyone to applaud him for the achievement he had achieved. Soon after, Ars merged with those present, but when he felt tired, he went out to refresh himself in calm air on his own. At that moment, someone spoke to him, and suddenly it turned out to be King Dan. Ars trembled in fear, told him, "Don't worry, I want to talk to you a little, because I know you have a strange ability to discover other people's skills, so I would like to ask you about the abilities of my allies." Ars thought a little, and since he used the skill of evaluation on the wise without making mistakes, he said, "Their abilities do not even reach the level of soldiers. They are very weak." Dan replied, "He lived on you. I know they're very loyal, but none of them has a special ability at all. I'm going to borrow one of your team members." Ars Dan asked, "What speech made me join your brother?" "I'm kidding you, but I want to tell you that we have a strong army and abundant financial resources, but we lack the skills that you and your team have. You are a great addition to us," Dan replied. Then he said, "If only I could find a talented person, bring him to me personally." The surprise was that he intended to appoint him as president of the city of Canary, which is of Anumir origin, and of course Anumir would retain a greater position in the kingdom. "I'm confident in you and your team," Dan stressed, then said goodbye to Ars and walked. Shortly after, Ars and Rit were found at the Shadow Chief, and there Ars asked the Shadow Chief to look for highly skilled people with them, saying, "If you help me, ask for whatever you want." The Shadow Boss agreed, and it took a while for a woman in a difficult situation to beat the Shadow Boss. When he told her they were closed, she explained that she did not intend to stay with them, but was looking for work. One of the gang members came out screaming at her and wanting to get her out, but the Shadow leader acted wisely. He sat down with her and gave her food. On the other hand, the The woman identified herself as Mary and said, I tell you, I was working with the governor of Mason province before he died, and when conflict broke out between his sons, he left them and walked. The shadow leader replied, you came at the right time. Then the scene moved to Ars, and suddenly a maid entered on him and told him that someone was waiting for him outside. And when he went out, he found the leader of the shadow standing in front of him with Mary, and he said to him, I have brought you your request, sir. Rhett told Ars, are you sure she's talented? Don't go back behind me, the shadow boss replied, then left them and walked. When Ars activated the evaluation skill on her, he said, I would love to tell you that I was shocked by her level. Mary, her abilities exceed the level of creativity, and arguably a little smarter than Zane, and her diplomatic skills are higher than Lisa either. She is a combination of strength, intelligence, and cunning. Then he asked her, are you going to work with us? Rit replied, she refuses, especially after we learned that she was an advisor to the governor of Mason before his death. Rit added, I have heard dangerous talk about her. In addition to that, she has a younger brother who is the right-hand shield of King Dan's brother, and she is easily able to convey their news. Elsewhere, Mary said, you are stupid and exactly the same thinking as my brother. Tell me, what are you going to do? Will you work with me, or am I looking for work elsewhere? Ars thoughtlessly told her, congratulations, and then brought her into his team, while the rest of the team was completely opposed to her being with them. Shortly after, Rhett opened the door to Ars and told him, I have crossed the line, and Zane would enter crying for Mary, who had been sleeping all day, and when she was bored, she would come down to make fun of them in the training ground. Zane was deeply insulted, as Mary took him to a remote location and ran after the dogs without anyone knowing why. Suddenly they heard a terrifying explosion shaking the entire place, so the soldiers prepared for a possible attack on the village. But the situation was that Mary and Jane were standing still. Mary was betting on who would destroy the place first. Everyone noticed that they wanted to kick her out quickly, but Ars announced to them that she would prove her efficiency. Mary said, I have an idea. Let's make a challenge between us, and if I lose, I promise I'll leave. Took the words seriously and said, let's get started. Ars gathered the soldiers and explained that they would be divided into two groups. The first group with Marie as commander, and the second group with Zayn as commander. They will use training swords to fight a mock battle. If the commander is injured, or the enemy group is completely wiped out, they will achieve victory, while preventing Jane from using her magic. Ars also distributed explosive balls to ensure no one was injured. He asked, who will join Mary with me? No one wanted to go with them, and then Mary said the score was tied, so they sent a group of junior soldiers to avoid superiority on either side. The soldiers prepared to move into the forest, and everyone was watching what was going to happen. Ars said to Mary, what do we do with Rhett and Jane? Mary replied that she had a plan and looked at the soldiers and said, in principle, we will lose, but that is if I am not with you, loved ones. She began to explain her plan, while Rhett explained to the soldiers, Mary's team is very weak, and they probably set a trap for us, so we will divide into two groups. I'm in front, Zane is in the second set, and will be behind us in support. If the enemy attacks them, use blasts immediately, and we'll get back to you with good news. Everyone replied, okay. The plan began to be implemented, but suddenly they heard an explosion from the front, so they went there, surprised when a member of Mary's team appeared from among the trees saying, please, take me with you on your team, and I promise to tell you their plan. Okay, Rhett replied, revealing the plan, saying Mary expected them to be divided into two groups. Then they heard an explosion from the side of the palace, as if a real attack was going to happen on them, which means that when they return to the palace, they will be locked there, and Zane will be in an easy trap. Rhett said, Ars can't agree to that. You seem to be lying to us. The person replied, yes, I'm a liar. Mary asked me to set a trap for you, and then said, I'll tell you the right plan. He opened a map, referring to the location of the ambush prepared by Mary. He said, as soon as you reach that point, the soldiers will attack you from both sides, and as soon as you get there, I will use the explosive ball with me, although I will not do that, and they will be surprised by the attack that will eliminate them. Rhett took the explosive ball from him, and made the soldiers search for it, and another explosive ball appeared from them, and the one who was with him was carrying the phantom explosive ball, while he was going to use the real ball to carry out Mary's attack. We'll turn behind them and surprise them to finish them off, Rhett told the soldiers, revealing Mary's plan. They reached the soldiers' position and gathered from behind to attack them with foolish effort, but it turned out to be an ambush hidden inside Marie's ambush. Mary went out and Ars was with her, looking at one of her soldiers, saying, long live on you. Then Rhett told her, I don't understand anything anymore. Where did your soldiers go? In any case, if we eliminate Ars, I will declare victory. Rhett turned completely, while Mary picked up Ars and dragged him, and Rhett and the soldiers ran after her, and Ars shouted, Rhett, hold them. Suddenly the trap set for them worked, shocked, and the soldiers fell one by one. Rhett, too, fell into a trap and then got up and continued running after them until Rhett saw nothing in front of him. Mary told Ars, "You'll be even more happy when you do what I told you." Ars started throwing balls at them, and in a moment of loud explosion, the area was devastated. "Have you seen anything like that, my friend?" On the other hand, Mary's team discovered Zane's whereabouts and pointed to him, and Zane informed his team that there were few soldiers and that they would be able to eliminate them easily. But the rest of the soldiers appeared from all directions and surrounded them, which meant that Mary faced Rhett and his team alone. At that moment, Jane took Zen and quickly fled, while the soldiers set off behind them. The situation returned to Mary, who seemed very happy and told Ars, "We won," she continued. "Look, Jane has fallen, and Zane is trying to escape, but the soldiers force him to go in the same direction as Mary, and Zane is only 2 steps away until he meets Mary, as she was already targeting him." Suddenly, Rhett discovered her plan and told her, "It's impossible to get to Zane." Mary replied, "Don't worry, he's going to get to us now." Then Rhett tried with all his might to eliminate Ars, while Zane was on Mary's goal, and suddenly, Rhett hit 2-second explosive balls. Dust filled the place, and everyone gathered waiting for the decisive moment. Indeed, Mary won, and Mary's team came home celebrating their victory, while Rhett's face and disappointment pervaded his team. However, Rhett said, "Despite the weakness of our teams, you won brilliantly." Ars then apologized with Zane to Mary, and they welcomed her into the team. Mary explained that if there had been a real battle, she would not have had a chance to win, because Jane did not use her abilities, and Rhett he fights against Ars, and not on his side. Ars thanked her, saying, "You're lucky to have been able to assemble such a team," and then asked, "What's your next step?" Mary replied, "Very simple. Strive with all your might to become emperor, that is, to rule all the provinces." Suddenly, Ars recalled Raven's words and said to himself, "I'm sure you're going to be a very great figure in the future." Afterwards, they had a big party celebrating Mary officially joining the team, and everyone was happy. Suddenly, Rhett approached Ars and said, "I'm really sorry. I disappointed you and broke my promise with Raven. I feel like I won't be able to protect you as I thought." Ars replied, "You did what you had to do, and it increased, but the road is long and I need you with me." On the other hand, Zane thanked Marie, saying, "I understand why you were beating me while running." And Mary replied, "Being smart doesn't mean you're going to survive on the battlefield. Battle needs competencies other than intelligence, and if someone falls in your position during the fight, a lot of soldiers will perish behind them. So next time, I'll train you and make Jane attack you with her magic." After a little time, Ars found himself alone in the room, until the maid came in informing him of the existence of a letter from King Dan, asking to attend the last meeting before the decisive battle, with the need to bring the whole team and get ready to go. Will Ars be able to fight the war without bloodshed as he wants? And what happens next? Events seem to be coming at the doors. After Ars assumed rule of the kingdom following his father's death, he set out for Templar. The journey was long and exhausting. Meanwhile, Mary and Jane sat atop the carriage, enjoying the breeze and the warmth of the sunlight. Ars asked them to come down for a moment, explaining that he needed to discuss the military council and the decisive resolutions awaiting them there, as the decisions to be made could alter the course of the war entirely. The others tried to ease his burden, inviting him to join them and rest for a while, to step away from the relentless pressure of thought. Reitz remarked that the war might last longer than they anticipated, and that it was essential to clear their minds before the coming confrontations in order to endure what lay ahead. Along the way, they caught sight of the sea in the distance. Jane exclaimed with excitement that it was the first time she had ever seen it. They approached it, and she impulsively drank from it, only to spit it out the moment she discovered its overwhelming saltiness. Mary laughed, saying she had grown accustomed to seeing many places, and that she understood the feeling of discovering a new world far removed from the battlefield. Ars promised them that once the war ended, he would take them on a true journey, without weapons, without worry. Zane pointed out the abundance of fish, evident from the movement rippling across the water's surface. Overcome with enthusiasm, Jane suddenly charged toward the sea in a spontaneous outburst. Her behavior angered a man nearby, prompting them all to burst into laughter and quickly leave before the situation could escalate. Soon after, they arrived at the Lord's castle, where the nobles had gathered. Ars was received with condescending glances, for he hailed from the countryside rather than from an ancient prestigious lineage. At that moment, Lumiere appeared, visibly pleased to see him amid the tense, formal atmosphere. Elsewhere, Karan approached and was surprised to see Mary. She explained that she had previously refused to work with him because she did not wish to entangle herself in the labyrinth of politics. However, she had chosen to serve Ars because she had felt at ease with him from the beginning. She even stated openly that she considered him a better lord than Karan, in her own view. Some of the nobles rebuked her boldness, yet Karan merely laughed, remarking that she had not changed and that he was glad she was present. Another noble intervened, accusing her of potential espionage, given that her relative Thomas worked under X. Karan defended her, pointing out that her experience might grant them deeper insight into the enemy's movements, especially considering her distinguished service under the former Duke. Then the military council commenced. One official explained that the enemy forces held numerical superiority. However, Templar granted them economic advantages and stable supply lines, and their soldiers were well trained. Karan commented that the enemy commanded seasoned generals with long experience and that the neutral nobles had begun leaning toward X, believing him to be the stronger side. He insisted on a plan capable of swiftly shifting the balance of war. One noble proposed seizing Balad, one of the 3 principal cities, to secure the support of the neutral factions. Ars noticed Karan's hesitation and asked Mary to voice her opinion frankly. She described the plan as naive, explaining that attacking Balad would prompt X to strike at Sebar, which lay undefended, granting him decisive advantage and pushing the neutral factions firmly into his camp. She concluded that the proposal ignored its strategic consequences. Her words angered some in attendance, but Karan supported her analysis and asked for a safer alternative. She requested that Rizal present his plan, and Ars revealed that he was the military strategist responsible for their movements. Rizal was met with dismissive looks due to his youth, yet Karan granted him the floor. He explained that leaving Templar without defense would be a grave mistake. He proposed forming an alliance with the Duchy of Paradel, located near Orontes, asserting that X would hesitate to attack, fearing that Arkantes might be struck in retaliation should his forces advance too far. The nobles objected, claiming that Paradel would never agree to such an alliance. At that point, Zayn intervened, suggesting the involvement of a third party through an indirect bribe to the emperor. Some rejected the idea, citing the emperor's wealth. However, Reitz pointed out that the emperor was no older than 17 and that his followers effectively governed in his stead. It was likely, he argued, that they would accept the offer. Karan was impressed by the strategy and resolved to implement it. He entrusted Ars with full oversight of the operation, as the proposal had originated from his retainer. Karan pledged to cover the expenses and ordered Lumiere to support Ars with all available means. As Ars left the hall, he felt the piercing gazes of hatred and suspicion trailing behind him, yet he swore to himself that he would succeed. No matter the trials awaiting him, he would not disappoint Karan. He would prove to them all that he was worthy of standing among them. After the council concluded, the tension eased slightly. Ars gathered with his team in their own way, soft laughter breaking the weight of decisive resolutions. Mary affirmed that if their plan succeeded, Ars would surpass the other nobles, and none would dare belittle him again. He hesitated for a moment, fully aware that failure would place him in grave danger, but his followers reassured him that they would stand behind him until the very end. Jane wondered how they would negotiate with the emperor. Ars explained that Reitz might succeed in such a task, yet the widespread prejudice in the capital made sending him an uncalculated risk. Mary admitted that she wasn't particularly skilled in negotiation, so Jane suggested seeking the help of Lisha, whose calm demeanor and intelligence in dealing with those in power made her well suited for the role. Soon after, Ars headed to Lisha's residence. She welcomed him with a sincere smile, while Hammond greeted him warmly, though concern over the war's developments was evident on his face. Ars wished to speak of the plan immediately, but Lisha insisted they share a meal first and discuss matters calmly afterward. Reitz thanked their host, and Hammond replied that he regarded him as one of the family, adding that Lisha saw in him a person of standing among his companions. In a quiet corner of the garden, Lisha spoke privately with Ars. She told him that ever since meeting him, she had begun opening herself to the people of the territory and understanding their needs. She respected him deeply for preserving the region's stability despite the storm surrounding them. Even her father had acknowledged his ability to manage affairs with wisdom. Then she showed him the flowers he had once given her. She had planted and tended them herself, a testament to how firmly she cherished what he represented to her. When he explained their need for someone to handle negotiations with the emperor, she agreed without hesitation. However, she placed an unexpected condition: that he marry her after the war. Ars was startled by her directness, but she assured him that her feelings hadn't changed since their first meeting. He recognized the sincerity in her words and recalled her unwavering support. He confessed that he carried the same feelings for her. He offered to marry her at once, declaring his love and promising to protect her. She smiled gently and replied that she wasn't seeking protection, but partnership, that she would stand beside him until he achieved his ambitions. They informed Hammond of their intention to marry. At first, he hesitated, believing it too soon, but Leisha's determination ultimately convinced him. A modest celebration followed, filled with joy, as though they had seized a moment of peace from the heart of war itself. During that time, they held a meeting with X, who revealed that the Prime Minister, Chakma, was the true power behind the Emperor, and that his reputation spoke of greed and selfishness. He advised them to focus on him first, exercising the utmost caution in their dealings. Ars then presented his plan: to travel by sea to the imperial capital and seek Chakma's mediation before initiating negotiations with Paradel, with Lycia personally leading the discussions. Mary remarked that their youth might diminish their authority, but Lycia explained that she would bring Lumiere along to strengthen their position, as her presence would lend political weight that couldn't be ignored. Mary sighed with a trace of jealousy, remarking that she herself was more deserving to be Ars's bride. Jane objected with clear emotion, reminding them of the danger of their current stage and that they stood on the brink of a decisive war. Yet Mary dispelled the tension, praising Jane's talent in magic and asking to learn from her. Jane was moved by her sincerity and agreed to become her teacher. Zane smiled quietly, observing that Lycia possessed the subtle ability to influence others with ease, reaching her objectives without arousing suspicion. In the end, Ars asked Jane to accompany them as a personal guard on the sea voyage, considering it a rare opportunity for her to see the world beyond the boundaries of war. She paused for a moment, then agreed with enthusiasm, ready to embark on a new experience. The carriage set off once more, and within minutes, exhaustion overcame Jane, and she drifted into sleep. Lycia merely commented that such fatigue was natural on a journey this long. Along the road, Ars noticed a man watching them from afar. He studied his features for a brief moment, then recognized him. It was X. Approaching them, he delivered grave news. X had formed an alliance with the Saints, and he would provide full details once he obtained confirmed information. The revelation struck like lightning. Ars immediately understood that Quran's forces could be surrounded from two fronts, placing them in a severe strategic predicament. Yet Lycia remained composed, asserting that Paradel could offer defensive support if the alliance succeeded, and that the true key to resolving the crisis lay in winning the upcoming negotiations. Suddenly, the carriage jolted violently. Lycia's bag fell, spilling numerous books on politics and statecraft. She admitted that she had been studying diligently to grasp the intricacies of power. Ars realized the depth of her effort and felt compelled to rise to her level. She reminded him that the success of the negotiations was their shared objective, as partners, not merely as husband and wife. Soon after, they arrived at Templar Castle. Quran spoke of the Saints' movements, and Lycia informed him that they were already aware. She proposed opening a temporary channel of communication with them until their return, to prevent any sudden escalation. Quran appreciated her sound judgment and praised Ars's choice. At that moment, Lin, Quran's eldest son, entered the chamber, declaring that Ars was too young to negotiate with Chakma. His father rebuked him immediately for his insolence, and he withdrew with an apology. Later, Quran confessed his concern about his son, questioning whether he possessed genuine talent. Ars explained that Lin's current abilities were limited, but that he held the potential to become a strong leader if he matured and learned discipline. Quran regained a measure of hope. At the harbor, Ars purchased a simple gift for Lycia, and she vowed to cherish it. They boarded the ship, and Ars thanked Lumiere for joining them. However, to his surprise, Lin appeared among them without permission. He declared that he had reached adulthood and wished to participate. The situation troubled Ars, yet he didn't object. Jane delighted in the sea during her first voyage, while most of the others suffered severe seasickness. Even Lin, who tried to maintain his composure before ultimately collapsing in full view of everyone. Suddenly, they spotted men adrift in the sea and rescued them. The moment Jane offered water to one of them, he seized her as a hostage. In an instant, she burned his knife and immobilized the others with a swift incantation. The men were bound, and Lin rushed forward, demanding their execution under the assumption that they were pirates. Ars intervened and questioned them, noting that their weapons were nothing more than fishing tools. They confessed that they were fishermen crushed by debt after a financial crisis struck the empire, forcing them to attempt theft in order to feed their families. Ars decided to provide them with goods to sell in exchange for gold, considering it an interest-free loan to be repaid once their circumstances improved. Lin doubted them, but Ars asserted that trust could sometimes forge loyalty more effectively than punishment. He released them, and Jane expressed her hope that they would find an honorable path once more. At last, they arrived at the imperial capital. They were met with streets crowded by the homeless and scenes of misery, while the nobles' mansions rose nearby in extravagant luxury. Ars grasped the vast chasm between poverty and wealth, realizing that the flaw within the system ran deeper than he had imagined. Noticing his distant expression, Lisha informed him that she would withdraw to prepare herself thoroughly for the negotiations ahead. The following morning, Lisha appeared in an elegant new dress she had purchased in the capital. Ars was surprised by the sudden change, but she merely offered a calm smile, assuring him that every detail served a purpose. They entered the palace to meet Chakma. Ars activated his appraisal skill and sensed sharp intelligence and relentless ambition. He immediately understood that this would be a difficult confrontation. Chakma wasted no time and asked directly what compensation he would receive in exchange for mediating with Paradel. Before Licia responded, they recalled the agreement from the previous night. Their maximum budget was 2,000 gold coins, but they would begin with 500 to manage the negotiations strategically. She offered 500. Chakma laughed, demanding 5,000. She raised the offer to 800, then 900, while he remained unmoved. When he made as if to leave, she concluded firmly 1,000 gold, stating that this was the absolute limit of their resources. He studied her for a moment, then agreed. Suddenly, Lin intervened emotionally, revealing that their true budget was 2,000 gold and insisting they pay it in full. Chakma immediately realized they had concealed the truth. He deemed it deception and cancelled the agreement at once, declaring that if they wished to resume negotiations, the amount must exceed 2,000. Then he departed the chamber. Ars felt as though everything had collapsed. He reprimanded Lin for his recklessness, yet Lin remained convinced that he hadn't erred in defending the honor of his nation. Licia followed Chakma and apologized for the disorder, but he refused to return to the table. At that moment, she took a decisive step. She removed the dress she was wearing and declared that it was worth 500 gold. His attendant examined it carefully and confirmed its value. At last, Chakma was persuaded. He agreed to mediate with Paradel, though he warned them against any further mistakes in the next phase. They returned to the inn. Ars admitted his concern, but Licia explained that what had occurred was calculated. Her goal had never been to push the price to its lowest possible point, but to secure a definitive agreement. She had known Chakma wouldn't be satisfied with 1,000 gold. He had been seeking an excuse to raise the amount. Lin's outburst had given him that excuse, forcing her to use the dress as a contingency she had prepared in advance. The result, they secured the mediation without exceeding their budget. Jane admired her intelligence, while Lin viewed the entire affair as unacceptable deception and stormed out in anger. Lumiere followed him. He confessed that he couldn't accept lies in politics and that loyalty should remain pure. She replied calmly that those born into privilege don't always understand the harshness of reality, and that what Ars and Licia had done wasn't greed, but protection of their homeland. He gave no response and walked away. She watched him for a long moment, aware that he possessed the qualities of a true leader, yet he was still only at the beginning of his path. A week later, a messenger from Paradel arrived bearing their official response. At the same time, Lin's absence remained an unresolved mystery. He hadn't returned since the incident during the negotiations, leaving Ars wondering what he had been doing all those days. They entered a new round of talks, this time with Paradel's Minister of Foreign Affairs. From the man's tone alone, Ars immediately sensed unwavering loyalty to the Emperor. This wasn't someone who would bend for gold alone. The minister cut straight to the point. "Are you seeking independence?" he asked coldly, making it clear that such an ambition would be considered outright treason. At that precise moment, Lin appeared. He stepped forward with steady resolve and declared that it was X's faction that was truly plotting independence, that their intentions were already evident. The minister believed him. Lin's reputation for uncompromising honesty lent his words unexpected authority. If Lin said it, then it must be true. The minister's perception shifted. He concluded that X was the disloyal one, and in the end, he agreed to an alliance with Mixian. Back at the inn, Ars was still stunned by how swiftly the tide had turned. Licia explained calmly that the credit belonged to Lin. His intervention had shifted the axis of trust in their favor. In political warfare, perception was everything, and Lin had delivered the decisive blow. It was then revealed that Lin had visited Licia the previous night, apologizing for his recklessness during the meeting with Shakma. He confessed that he finally understood. Their deception hadn't been for personal gain, but to protect Mixian. He asked her to teach him the art of politics instead of charging forward blindly. She advised him to attend the capital's noble banquets. His rigid honesty had earned him widespread trust, and his statements about X's intentions had already ignited rumors across the court that X was disloyal to the emperor. Lin felt guilty for causing such unrest. She told him quietly that acknowledging one's mistake was the first step toward growth. Later, Ars thanked him for his support during the negotiations and expressed his hope that they could work together to build a stronger future for Mixian. They returned to Sayre, where Kuran welcomed them warmly. He admitted that their achievement had altered the trajectory of the war itself. However, upon noticing Lin among them, he immediately reprimanded him for leaving without permission. Lin bowed his head and apologized, declaring that he had realized he needed to learn before he could ever hope to lead. At the training grounds, Ars activated his skill and assessed Lin's status. His parameters had indeed risen. It wasn't just sentiment. He had truly grown. For the first time, Ars felt genuine hope for his development. Kuran then announced a reward of 100 gold to each of them. Ars accepted, already planning to use it to improve conditions in Lampert. But celebration didn't last long. Their next move was revealed. They would invade the Alvarta territory. Ars and Lumiere were assigned command over the Canier soldiers, with orders to assemble all forces in Sayre by the following month. Later that evening, Jane approached Ars. Sensing the tension he tried to conceal, he admitted the truth. This would be the first battle he commanded himself. Fear was natural, but no matter what awaited him on that battlefield, he was determined not to disgrace his father's legacy, no matter the cost. 2 weeks later, Zane was training relentlessly within Loven Castle, pushing himself to the brink of collapse. Mary demanded that he continue, but he reminded her sharply that she had promised to teach him military tactics, not exhaust him without structure or purpose. At that moment, Wrights entered the hall, snatched the mug of beer from her hand, and mocked her attempt to lecture on strategy while intoxicated. He stated firmly that discipline precedes instruction. She protested stubbornly, yet the rising tension was cut short by Zane's visible unease. His thoughts were elsewhere. Why hadn't Ars returned yet? The question lingered heavily in the air. For a fleeting moment, Zane considered abandoning his post to search for him, but Mary reminded him of his primary duty, monitoring and safeguarding the castle. Before anxiety could deepen further, Ars appeared without warning. Relief washed over them instantly. They gathered around a simple meal, and Ars announced that the army would mobilize in 2 days. Reitz suggested one final round of drills, but Ars refused. The soldiers were ready. At this point, confidence mattered more than draining their stamina. Later, he walked through the village with Licia, seeking a quiet moment before stepping into his first true battle as commander. The villagers stopped him with genuine concern, warning him of war's dangers and offering food as a prayer for his safe return. He thanked them, fully aware of the weight he carried on his shoulders. On their way back, Licia suggested delivering the food to the castle first, but Ars asked to visit his father's grave. She understood, and she let him go alone. Standing before Raven's grave, Ars spoke honestly about the alliances he had forged, about the first battle he would lead, about the fear he refused to show anyone. He questioned whether he was truly ready. Then he reached his answer. He would fight to protect his people. One by one, his companions joined him at the grave, pledging to guard him until the very end. At dawn, the army prepared to depart. Licia handed Ars his sword, assuring him that she would protect the castle in his absence. In the square of Templar, Kuran stood before the assembled soldiers. He thanked them for answering the call and declared that their ultimate objective was control of Arcantes. But the first step would be the capture of Balaud, with Paradel's support securing their rear. He urged them to fight for Mixian and for the future of their homeland. Cheers erupted. Ars studied the ranks. No visible fear, no hesitation. This army wasn't fighting for him alone, but for a shared cause. And from that realization, he drew strength. They marched toward Alvarta immediately. Soldiers moved around Ars with unwavering confidence, assuring him they would guard his back. He smiled, openly expressing his pride in leading them. From a distance, Lumiere observed quietly. He was a natural commander. He earned loyalty without ever demanding it. Upon reaching Alvarta, the order to attack was given, but the enemy surrendered without resistance. The abrupt submission puzzled Ars. Karan explained that their opponent had recognized the overwhelming numerical disadvantage and that morale had already collapsed. Still, he warned Ars against complacency. Calm before battle could conceal dangers far greater than open combat, especially before their advance toward Belzud. Elsewhere, within Sam Castle, Thomas stood before Governor Fried and declared his readiness to defend the city at any cost. Fried felt reassured. Thomas stated that he would personally oversee the strategy and fortifications. He was confident. The coming battle, he believed, would be decided in their favor. After Thomas departed, Fried's daughter Selina stepped forward and told her father that a ruler shouldn't appear so compliant. He should assert his authority with strength. Fried sighed. The weight of war had worn heavily on him. He admitted that part of him wished to leave command to Thomas, but there was one matter he stressed above all else. Fakamakoro Fortress must be protected, no matter the cost. Selina absorbed his words, then declared with unwavering resolve that she would personally see it done. Meanwhile, Karan convened a decisive war council. His objective was clear: seize Samak without unnecessary casualties. He demanded precise and calculated strategies. Zane stepped forward with a proposal. Around Samak Castle stood 3 fortified outposts, each guarded by 1,000 soldiers, and reinforced with a magical barrier. His plan was to divide their forces into 3 strike units and assault the fortresses simultaneously. If the outer defenses fell, the castle itself would surrender without direct siege. After brief consideration, Karan approved the strategy. He would position the main army near the castle and advance once the fortresses were secured. Ars and Lumiere were assigned to capture Fakamakoro, the most dangerous of the 3. Upon arrival, they immediately understood why. Fakamakoro was the only position that provided a clear vantage point over Samak Castle. Whoever controlled it controlled the battlefield's vision. Zane suggested dispatching scouts to the summit, but Mary stopped him. True strategy, she said, wasn't about reacting. It was about predicting the enemy's move. If you were in their position, she asked him, what would you do? He paused, then answered. He would attempt to encircle Ars's army during the assault. She nodded. Exactly. They had to secure the mountain's base to prevent a rear attack. Inside the fortress, Selina received word that Ars's forces were approaching. Without hesitation, she activated a powerful magical barrier surrounding the entire stronghold. Ars understood instantly. Breaking that barrier was the key to everything. The mages lined up and began bombarding it with concentrated mana. The shield trembled, but held. Then Jane stepped forward. She summoned a massive fire sphere and launched it with explosive force. The barrier cracked, fragments shattering under the impact. But moments later, it regenerated. Mary realized the truth. A high-tier mage inside was continuously feeding it mana. Pressure mounted. Scouts reported that 10,000 enemy soldiers were advancing toward the mountain. The main army had been dispatched to protect the fortress. Zane proposed a tactical withdrawal. If they failed, annihilation was possible. But if they succeeded, they could hold out until Karan's reinforcements arrived. One mage calculated that destroying the barrier would require half a day of uninterrupted assault. Lumiere considered retreat the safest option. Ars refused. If they withdrew now, they would hand the enemy a decisive advantage. He ordered Reitz to intercept the approaching forces. Jane declared she could shatter the barrier within 1 hour. Debate fractured the command circle. In the end, Lumiere issued the order for a full assault. At the mountain's base, X's soldiers believed they would catch their enemies off guard. Instead, they walked straight into a meticulously prepared ambush. Arrows rained down through the narrow pass. Reitz, known on the battlefield as the Reaper, carved through enemy lines without hesitation. The strategy was flawless. Force them into confined terrain where their numerical superiority meant nothing, then seal both flanks to eliminate escape routes. Morale shattered rapidly. Above, Zane realized their mana reserves were nearly depleted. Selina, however, had access to a vast supply. Resources Fried had prepared long ago. She felt insulted by the implication that she required support. To her, it was doubt in her own strength. Her resolve hardened. She poured even more power into the barrier. Then Jane made a reckless decision. She drank the remaining concentrated mana, preparing to unleash her strongest spell. One mage warned her of the danger of magical collapse. seconds. She turned to Ars. Her eyes held no hesitation. She was ready to bear the consequences. She cast her final incantation. A storm of blazing fire spheres descended upon the fortress. The ground trembled violently under the inferno. Selena strained with every ounce of strength to sustain the barrier. Cracks spread. Light fractured across its surface, and then it shattered completely. Jane collapsed from exhaustion. Ars caught her before she struck the ground. Genuine admiration filled his voice as he acknowledged her power. With a faint smile, she asked whether her performance had been worthy of praise. He didn't hesitate. "You were incredible," Reitz returned, announcing that the battle had been completely secured. Celebration spread through the ranks. Mary observed that something had shifted within them all. Their first real battle had tempered the team like steel and fire. Karan commended Ars for taking control of the fortress, then asked about Selena and her soldiers. His verdict was immediate. Execution. Selena accepted the judgment calmly. To her, failure was a stain she deserved to bear. As soldiers moved to bind the prisoners, Ars stepped forward and halted the order. Releasing them would be dangerous, he admitted, but killing them would be worse. Bloodshed would plant seeds of hatred that could fracture Mishian's unity in the future. Zane proposed a compromise. Evaluate the captives, recruit those with talent into their ranks, and use the rest as leverage in future negotiations. After a brief pause, Karan agreed. Ars approached Selena and told her that her duty had been to protect her men and bring them back alive. And in that, she hadn't failed. He offered the possibility of cooperation after the war. She thanked him for sparing her soldiers, yet to her, defeat still weighed too heavily to dismiss. Meanwhile, Jane admitted that she had realized Selena was the one sustaining the barrier. She acknowledged that Selena's magic wasn't merely defensive, it was the kind suited to leading lords, built for command and protection. Karan then assigned Selena a final task. Persuade Fried to swear allegiance. It would be the last opportunity before matters escalated beyond diplomacy. That evening, Ars personally evaluated the prisoners one by one. Reitz remarked that the decision had strengthened the army not just in numbers, but in quality. Soon after, X arrived with news of their next objective, Samiyet Castle, a heavily fortified stronghold with no entry except its main gate, and Thomas was commanding its defense. This wouldn't be easy. Elsewhere, Selena returned to Samik Castle and apologized to Fried for her failure. Instead of rebuking her as she had expected, he welcomed her back safely. That more than anything unsettled her. Kurin's army soon stood before the castle walls. The order to attack was given. The defending commander was confident. The gate would never fall. He ordered the cannons to fire. The assault began. Then suddenly, the gate opened from within. Confusion erupted across both sides. The internal mechanism had been triggered in secret. It was part of Zane's strategy. During the prisoner exchange, he had arranged for infiltration. A direct assault would have cost them dearly, so instead, they would break the fortress from the inside. X later questioned how the infiltrators had passed undetected. The answer was simple. Blending among prisoners had been the only viable cover. Selena ordered her troops to prepare for combat. But then came the true shock. Fried himself issued the order to surrender. We returned to Fried after an earlier campaign. He had once stood proudly before Selena, recounting his victories and placing a necklace around her neck as a symbol of her courage on the battlefield. But the War of Succession had changed him. The bravery that once drove him forward was now entangled with hesitation, and that hesitation had begun to shape his decisions. We returned to the present. Fried urged Selena to flee with the others. She refused. She wouldn't abandon the battlefield without a fight. Thomas regarded her with open admiration for her resolve. Then he declared the truth. Militarily, the castle was already lost, but he had a plan. From within his cloak, he produced an explosive magic catalyst. His strategy was simple and ruthless. Lure Karan into Samiyet Castle, then detonate the entire stronghold. Fried suggested evacuating the civilians first. Thomas refused immediately. Karan would never enter an empty fortress. Selena denounced the scheme as vile, unworthy of a warrior's honor. Thomas countered coldly. Defeating Karan in such a manner would immortalize the castle's name in history. Fried initially agreed to activate the catalyst once the enemy entered, but when he looked into the fearful eyes of his people, he wavered, and then he made his choice. With his own hands, he shattered the catalyst. He declared that he wouldn't sacrifice innocent lives for a hollow victory. His first duty was to protect his people. He faced Thomas directly. Thomas withdrew, fury simmering in his eyes, warning them that they would regret betraying X. His men attempted to strike. Selena stepped forward to shield her father, but Thomas deflected them effortlessly, proof that he remained a formidable warrior. Later, Fried personally surrendered to Kuran and requested clemency for his soldiers, stating they had merely followed his orders. Rather than punish him, Kuran offered him a place under his banner, recognizing him as a capable leader. From the shadows, Thomas observed everything. He had prepared a contingency, explosive traps hidden throughout the forest. He activated them, but the detonations didn't unfold as he had calculated. Something was wrong. X revealed the truth. The traps had already been neutralized. On Zane's orders, Selena demanded to know how they had uncovered the scheme. Zane explained calmly that he had anticipated Thomas might resort to extreme measures. Before the assault began, he had ordered a thorough sweep of the castle and its surroundings for hidden traps. On a battlefield where strategy decided fate, anticipation was the deadliest weapon of all. Fried apologized to Selena, admitting that he had disappointed her. In his attempt to strengthen the army, he had begun executing others' orders without independent judgment. She smiled gently and told him she had learned something from Ars. Courage doesn't always mean raising your sword. Sometimes it means laying it down. She assured him she was grateful he had welcomed her back, despite her failure to defend the fortress. At the palace, a maid entered Lycia's chamber to report Ars's victory. Lycia maintained her composure, replying that she must behave as a lord's wife should. The moment the maid left, her expression softened. She allowed herself a quiet smile. Ars's first campaign had succeeded. Back at Samiet Castle, Corin ordered a 3-day rest period. The soldiers received the decision with relief. At last, a chance to breathe. Jane sat enjoying her meal, while Ars stepped aside with Reitz. Reitz reminisced about the days when it had been nearly just the two of them, about how harsh and uncertain those times had been. He said he was glad to see Lampert gradually improving. Ars replied that he wanted to end the war quickly, so the people could finally live in peace. While walking through the city, they noticed a crowd gathered around a vendor. A flying toy had suddenly fallen mid-air, drawing disappointment from onlookers. The seller quickly recovered, presenting his true masterpiece, a magical doll powered by a wind mana stone. Most dismissed it as a novelty. Reitz called it an overpriced distraction, but Ars noticed something different. The craftsmanship, the mana flow, the precision of its movements. He decided to purchase it despite its price, 3 gold coins, enough to buy wheat for an entire year. Curiosity stirred within him. He activated his appraisal skill to examine the merchant. Nothing, no data returned. That alone was suspicious. This man wasn't ordinary. Later, during a strategy meeting, Coran explained that Templar was now secured. However, the enemy still held Balad and Arantes. Capturing Balad would grant them decisive superiority. Lumiere warned of the region's brutal winter. If snow began to fall before their assault, the campaign would become exponentially more difficult. Timing was critical. Coran decided to split the army into 2 divisions. One would attack the largest fortress protecting Balad. The other would advance toward Roto Castle in the north. If both strongholds fell, Balad's collapse would only be a matter of time. Lumiere and Ars were assigned to the 2nd Division. Zane observed the dense ring of fortresses surrounding Roto Castle and suggested negotiation rather than prolonged attrition. The responses were cold. None were willing to negotiate with Ars. Force seemed inevitable. Then a new message arrived. The commander of one fortress was willing to negotiate, on the condition that a commanding officer attend in person. Lumiere immediately recognized the name. Fort Balden, ruled by Lord Loba, a cunning leader with a formidable reputation. Lumiere admitted he wasn't confident he could persuade him. Then he turned to Ars and expressed his trust. Ars approached the fortress seeking negotiation. The guards demanded that he surrender his weapon. Reitz stepped forward instantly, refusing compliance without guarantees. Ars understood the danger. Laying down his sword could mean immediate execution. Mary reassured them that the guards wouldn't risk it. They knew Lumiere was fully capable of obliterating the fortress if harm befell them. Still, suspicion lingered. The fortress was closest to their camp, yet it had been the last to respond to their messages. Mary concluded that understanding Loba's true intent was the key to everything. Ars placed his sword on the ground and declared his purpose, negotiation. The gates opened. He entered alongside Reitz and Mary. Inside, he stumbled slightly, and the magical toy he had purchased earlier slipped from his grasp. A small bird powered by wind mana. Loba picked it up with visible interest. When Ars offered it to him, he declined. Subtle, calculated. Ars activated his appraisal skill and reviewed Loba's profile. Married, yet there was no indication of his wife's presence in the fortress. In the waiting chamber, Ars noticed a child's chair. Pieces began to align. When negotiations began, Ars spoke directly. "How is your wife in Roto Castle, especially with her delivery date so close?" Loba froze. Soldiers raised their weapons instantly. The question had struck a nerve. The truth emerged. Loba's wife was being held in Roto Castle as leverage. If he abandoned his post or defied orders, she would be executed immediately. In that moment, Ars understood. Loba wasn't negotiating out of loyalty. He was cornered, and if no solution appeared, he was prepared to fight to the bitter end. Ars quickly realized that the surrounding fortresses were in no better position. Roto Castle wouldn't be sending reinforcements. It became clear to him that Loba had requested negotiations with a commander for one reason only: to assassinate him before his own fortress fell, hoping that such a final act might spare his wife from execution. Reitz questioned why they hadn't launched an immediate assault, but Ars had noticed something else: hesitation in Loba's demeanor. That hesitation explained the delayed response to their letters. Stepping forward, Ars spoke calmly. "If you kill us here, you'll never see your newborn son." Loba didn't deny it. He admitted that he had already prepared himself to die in battle. But before that, he wanted to hold his son at least once. The soldiers shifted uneasily. It was obvious Loba was a commander deeply respected by his men. Ars then made an offer. When the war ended, Loba could join them. And in return, Ars would attempt something reckless. He would try to infiltrate Roto Castle and rescue his wife. Loba knew the odds were nearly impossible, but it was the only chance he had left. He agreed. Upon returning, Ars explained the situation to Lumiere. Reitz immediately asked about the rescue strategy. Ars admitted the truth. He didn't have a concrete plan yet. At that moment, Klamath appeared, criticizing the army's overall readiness. Reitz instinctively activated his appraisal skill. Combat power. Over 100. Not ordinary. Lumiere explained that Klamath commanded the Metro Mercenaries, an elite unit infamous for completing any contract they accepted. Ars welcomed the alliance, but Klamath made one thing clear: they fought for coin, nothing else. Reitz bristled at the bluntness. Klamath responded without emotion. Mercenaries were accustomed to facing death daily. Regular soldiers, however, were not yet prepared for that level of risk. His suggestion was pragmatic. Assign the most dangerous operations to the mercenaries. Let Ars focus on command. Lumiere supported the idea. They shifted to discussing the rescue plan. The families of several commanders were being held inside Roto Castle. The problem was that their exact location within the fortress remained unknown. Ars considered deploying the shadow unit for infiltration. Mary immediately pointed out the scale of the obstacle. Over 10,000 soldiers inside the castle. A small infiltration team alone would be suicide. She proposed a coordinated diversion, an external assault to draw attention, allowing the shadow unit to slip inside undetected. At once, Zane began constructing a full operational framework: open engagement to fix enemy forces in place, simultaneous covert infiltration behind their defensive structure, a dual-layered strategy. Elsewhere, inside Roto Castle, Lord Jean received reports that Canier's advance had slowed due to Loba's hesitation. He appeared confident. Winter was approaching. That alone worked in their favor. General Dan expressed eagerness for direct confrontation. Soon, a message arrived from Loba. It reported that Canier's army numbered 10,000 and that they intended to split their forces, sending half toward Roto. It also warned of a powerful mage capable of shattering the barrier at Fakamakoro. Jean evaluated the situation carefully. Remaining inside the city would place him in a passive defensive posture. He chose instead to march out and confront Canier's forces on open ground. In close combat, mages were far less effective. General Dan nodded. He was ready to meet them head-on. We returned to Ars and Loba. Loba admitted that he had been the one to send the message. He had intended to descend to the battlefield personally. Ars stopped him. "If the enemy discovers your betrayal before this is over," he said quietly, "your wife will be executed immediately." Loba clenched his fists. He was right. Ars handed him the magical toy, the wind-powered bird. "Wait," he told him. "Endure until the battle is decided. I'll bring her back." It wasn't a grand declaration. It was a promise. Loba accepted it, without another word. At Sam Castle, Zane assembled the commanders and laid out the operation. 5,000 soldiers would engage first, then appear to collapse under pressure and retreat toward the forest. Once the pursuing forces entered deep enough, the 2nd Division would emerge from concealed positions and encircle them. At the same time, the Shadow Unit would infiltrate Roto Castle and extract the hostages. A synchronized pincer, surface war, and shadow war. Ars admired the precision of the plan, but he voiced concern about the retreat phase. Reitz agreed. A retreat under pursuit could easily turn into a massacre before reaching the forest. Klamath offered to lead the diversion unit. Zane refused. The retreat had to look genuine. If a clearly elite unit handled it, Jean might hesitate. They needed him to commit his main force. The diversion force advanced under Lumaire's command, with Ars at his side. Before the clash, Ars addressed the soldiers. "We fight for Michion's peace," he declared. "Hold your ground." The order to engage was given. The two armies collided. General Dan's cavalry surged forward with overwhelming pressure. Jane launched a powerful offensive spell, but it barely slowed him. Ars activated his appraisal skill. Dan's combat rating was nearly on par with Reitz. His knights carried exceptionally high parameters. This wouldn't be simple. "Hold the line," Reitz roared across the ranks. Inside Roto Castle, the hostages were informed that the battle had begun. Preparations were underway to relocate them. Suddenly, X appeared. He incapacitated the guard in a single motion. "I'm here to get you out," he said calmly. Panic rippled through the room, but he reasserted control immediately. On the battlefield, Lumaire issued the order to retreat. The diversion force began a disciplined withdrawal. Dan wanted to pursue immediately. Lord Jean stopped him. "This retreat feels calculated." Murmurs spread among the soldiers. Could it be a trap? Jean made his decision. He would enter the battle personally. He ordered Dan to divide the army into two halves and execute a flanking maneuver to encircle the withdrawing enemy. Some soldiers hesitated. Jean wasn't known as a frontline warrior. Dan silenced their doubts. Jean was stronger than him. He descended from a brutal lineage of knight commanders. In the past, he had slain his own father and presented the severed head to the Duke of Michigan, securing his noble title through ruthless resolve. This wasn't hesitation, it was predation. The scene returned to Ars as Dan divided his forces, preparing to encircle them. Reitz barked orders, directing his men to push Dan back and create space. But before the formation could stabilize, Lord Jean appeared. He stepped forward calmly. "Why pretend to retreat?" he asked. Then he moved. He cut through the ranks without hesitation. He didn't even bother with a shield. His combat skill alone overwhelmed the soldiers in front of him. The diversion unit drew closer to the forest, but casualties were mounting rapidly. Lumaire warned that their line was nearing collapse and suggested contacting Clement for reinforcement. Ars refused. "Hold the formation. We don't break until we reach the trees." The forest line was only moments away. They crossed into it, and for a brief second the enemy vanished from sight. Then Dan burst through the undergrowth, charging straight at Ars. In that instant, Reitz intervened. A single decisive slash. Dan's arm fell to the ground. The shift in momentum was immediate. Morale surged among Canier's soldiers, but before they could capitalize, a fresh enemy detachment appeared ahead. Disaster loomed. Suddenly, forces from Loba's fortress surged in from both flanks, reinforcing Ars's position. Dan realized the battlefield had slipped from his control. He ordered his men to regroup, but before retreating, he loosed an arrow toward Loba. From a distance, Ars couldn't hide his surprise. Loba had risked everything. If the plan failed, his wife would be executed. Loba answered plainly, "You insisted on saving her. That changed my mind. He might lose everything." But he had chosen to fight. At the same time, inside Roto Castle, Dan issued an order through amplified sound magic. Execute the hostages. Within the fortress, X had already gathered them and guided them toward the sewer tunnels. Maria, Loba's wife, insisted on being the last to leave. Then, an alarm rang out. Guards began sweeping the area. X pulled her into concealment. The sewers were no longer viable. And then he realized something worse. Maria was on the verge of giving birth. Footsteps approached. One soldier moved toward their hiding place, but another voice called out that the hostages had been spotted in the sewers. The patrol diverted in the wrong direction. It bought them time. Very little time. Back in the forest, Reitz noticed the enemy had stopped pursuing. That wasn't normal. Had their strategy been exposed? Zane, however, remained composed. "They'll appear," he said quietly. "At the moment they believe gives them advantage." On the opposite side, Jean addressed his troops. "The retreat was a lure," he declared. "We wait. let Kenier's army be forced to attack inside our walls. It was calculated patience, but not all soldiers shared it. A group broke formation without orders, driven by the hunger for glory. Others followed. Jean initially allowed it, dismissing them as expendable. But when he saw Dan, wounded, one arm lost, still moving toward the battlefield, refusing to withdraw, Jean's expression hardened. He gave the command. The main force would move. Mary led the first unit that charged forward, successfully drawing the enemy in exactly as planned. Zane had anticipated that once soldiers sensed victory within reach, many would rush in pursuit of glory. That was why he had instructed Mary's squad to seize shields from fallen enemy soldiers during the clash and hold position until the decisive moment for a counterattack. He was confident that once they moved, the rest of the army would surge behind them. On another front, Ars regrouped with the Matro mercenaries. Clement reported that his objective had been completed and left the remainder of the engagement to them. The moment he stepped forward under his infamous title, the Demon of War, the enemy ranks visibly faltered. Some attempted to flee, but the mercenaries sealed the forest's narrow routes, trapping them in confined terrain, just as Mary had predicted earlier. Without warning, Dan reappeared, cutting straight through the mercenary formation toward Ars. Reitz intercepted him. Dan was thrown from his horse, rose to his feet, and issued a direct challenge. A duel. Ars activated his appraisal skill. Combat rating, 89, both of them. At first, Dan gained the upper hand. His weapon gave him reach and leverage, and he nearly forced a decisive strike. But in a fleeting instant, his blade lodged against a tree trunk. A minor miscalculation. It was enough. Reitz seized the opening and brought him down. Ars understood immediately. The victory hadn't been raw power. It had been timing. It had been composure. Lord Jean arrived with reinforcements. Appraisal activated again. Combat rating, 92. Stronger. Klamath stepped forward to engage him. When Ars attempted to intervene, Klamath struck him aside with a single motion, demonstrating the difference in battlefield experience. With Dan captured, morale among his soldiers shattered. One by one, they laid down their weapons. Ars declared the battle won. Cheers erupted across the forest. Suddenly, Dan broke free of his restraints, attempting to take his own life, unable to bear responsibility for defeat. Jean stopped him. He chose to remain at Dan's side. They would return home together once the war ended. The battlefield gradually emptied. Loba exhaled in relief, then collapsed. Ars rushed to him and discovered the truth. The wound he had sustained earlier was severe. He had remained standing throughout the battle to preserve his soldiers' morale. He spoke weakly of his dream, to live quietly with his family, far from blades and banners. Then, Maria's voice pierced the air. She ran to him. His wounds began closing slowly, almost miraculously. His will to live surged at the very moment their child was born. He smiled when he saw her safe. X admitted quietly that it was the first time he had ever witnessed a birth. Nearby, Klamath held the newborn in his arms. Tears streamed down his face, and for once, he didn't bother hiding them. The fallen were laid to rest before sunset. Soldiers dug graves for their comrades, lowering them into the earth with solemn silence. Ars stood before the rows of fresh mounds, unable to speak. The weight pressing on his chest wasn't grief alone, it was responsibility. Victory was no longer ambition, it was obligation. Those sacrifices couldn't be meaningless. That evening, Reitz entered Ars's tent and found him writing letters by lantern light. He was informing the families of the fallen, telling them of their son's courage, promising that their names wouldn't be forgotten. His voice faltered as he spoke. He admitted something he hadn't said aloud before. He wondered whether his father would be proud of him in moments like this. Reitz answered quietly that sorrow didn't diminish leadership. If anything, it proved he understood its cost. He sat beside him and began helping him finish the letters. Royal Fortress surrendered soon after. Lumiere announced that their next move would depend on Coran's success at Stowe Castle. X appeared shortly afterward, complaining about a single silver coin missing from his payment. Ars apologized for the accounting error and handed him an additional pouch as compensation. He then asked him to deliver news of the victory to Coran and assess the situation at Stowe. That night, X reached Coran's supply unit. and found the storage facilities ablaze. A soldier informed him that an ambush had destroyed more than half their provisions, including a significant reserve of stored mana. The implications were immediate. Without supplies, their advance would stall. He turned back at once to report to Ars. Inside Stowe Castle, the Khan's chief thanked Thomas for the success of the ambush. Thomas spoke calmly. The war would now shift into attrition. Winter would favor them. Yet he warned that Kuran wouldn't remain passive. He proposed assassination as the next step. The response was cautious. Kuran's guard was tight. Thomas's answer didn't waver. He would bring him down, no matter what it required. When word of the destroyed supplies reached Ars, Mary immediately noted the signature behind it. Thomas. The timing was deliberate. Winter was approaching. Time was no longer on their side. Then came another report. The enemy's mage division had transported a massive magical catalyst to Mount Tori, near Kuran's encampment. Ars felt it instantly. This wasn't coincidence. Something far more dangerous was being prepared, and the real question wasn't what it was, but when it would strike. Mary had already deciphered the enemy's movements. She realized that the shadow unit was still operating near the destroyed supply depots. Her conclusion was immediate. "They're not targeting provisions," she said. "They're targeting Kuran." She urged that the shadow unit be dispatched at once to the main encampment. The true objective wasn't logistics. It was the commander's head. The message reached the shadows swiftly. X understood the implication the moment he read it. The danger was moving toward Kuran himself. Moments later, torrential rain began pouring without warning. It wasn't natural. Mary recognized it instantly. Rain magic, a battlefield control spell designed to distort sound and vision, an assassination prelude. As expected, Kuran's camp was struck. He grasped the situation at once. The target was clear. Him. He issued defensive orders immediately. Then, a knight tore through the guard formation, cutting straight toward him. Thomas. The two clashed at blinding speed. Steel rang against steel. Mud splashed beneath their boots. Kuran's footing slipped in the soaked earth, and Thomas nearly delivered the killing blow. But at the last instant, Kuran twisted aside and drove his blade into Thomas's leg, halting his momentum. At that same moment, Thomas's men surged forward. Then, darkness swallowed the battlefield. A dense veil of shadow magic engulfed the area, smothering visibility entirely. X appeared behind Kuran, speaking calmly. "I was sent by Ars." Only then did Kuran understand. This wasn't mere concealment. It was an advanced shadow incantation, one that obscured movement and suppressed presence itself. X guided him toward the forest edge, ordering the surrounding soldiers to withdraw with him. He stayed behind, to buy time. Thomas entered the forest shortly after and immediately recognized the effect. Shadow domain. He instructed his men to ignore sight, focus on sound, on displacement, on breath. But X was faster. He moved without noise, without trace, eliminating soldiers one by one in silent strikes. Still, Thomas was no ordinary opponent. In a brief exchange, he managed to predict one of X's movements and inflicted a shallow wound. Yet once he confirmed that Kuran had escaped beyond immediate threat, he gave the order to retreat. The objective had failed. Back at camp, Kuran addressed his forces. Thomas had abandoned Stowe Castle to launch the assassination. That meant Stowe was now vulnerable. A counteroffensive could reclaim it swiftly. X felt his task complete. He prepared to return to Ars and collect his payment. Before he could depart, Kuran approached him personally and presented several heavy sacks of gold as gratitude for saving his life. He even offered him a formal position within his army. X declined without hesitation. "I already serve another commander," he replied, "and I'll collect my reward directly from him." He added almost casually, "for a much larger sum." He departed with his men. Kuran stood watching, astonished by the refusal. After a moment, he summoned a messenger. "Send word to Ars," he ordered. "Thank him for saving my life, and warn him." He allowed himself a faint smile. "That shadow will demand a very expensive reward." X returned to Ars's camp. Ars thanked him for the success of the mission, but his eyes immediately caught the wound he was carrying. He asked about his condition. There was no softness in the way he asked, only direct concern. Ars knew the shadow unit's reputation. They were ruthless mercenaries, men who had completed missions without hesitation, even when innocents were caught in the aftermath. So he asked their leader plainly, "Do you fear your own men?" X smiled faintly. "I don't fear them," he replied. "I trust them." They had fought countless battles together and survived every one. That was the foundation of their bond. Then he added almost casually, "Our reward won't be small." Negotiations began. But suddenly, X burst into laughter. "You're different," he said. "Most commanders treat us like tools. You treat us like people." Then he made his decision. His true reward wouldn't be gold. He declared his loyalty. The Shadow Unit would serve directly under ours. "You may become the strongest man in the Empire," he said calmly. "I'd rather stand beside that future than sell my blade elsewhere." With those words, X pledged himself. And in that moment, Ars understood something profound. He hadn't just gained soldiers. He had gained a hidden blade capable of turning the tide of wars. Elsewhere, inside Stowe Castle, soldiers argued over the failed assassination attempt on Kuran. Despite the setback, confidence hadn't faded. Their enemy's supplies had been crippled. Time was on their side. During the argument, a strange young man caught their attention. They mocked him, assuming him to be weak. One soldier attempted to lift his spear in display, but suddenly found it unbearably heavy. The boy stepped forward, lifted the spear effortlessly, and said quietly, "This weapon isn't meant for the weak." A brief silence followed. Then he walked away. Days later, Ars's forces arrived outside Stowe Castle. The strategy was clear. Kuran's army, 50,000 strong, would assault the southern gate, forcing the castle's commander to concentrate defenses there. Meanwhile, Ars would advance from the north with 5,000 troops, placing Stowe under dual pressure. At the northern gate, the defenders stood with visible confidence. They looked upon Ars's smaller force and saw only numbers, and in their minds, this battle wouldn't last long. Jane charged toward the northern gate alongside Wrights. She summoned a massive fire sphere and hurled it forward. The explosion tore through the gate, blasting open a wide breach and throwing the defenders into confusion. Ars didn't hesitate. He ordered the assault immediately, assigning Reitz and Mary to lead the breach. At the same time, Clement had already infiltrated the southern side and opened the gate from within, allowing Kuran's forces to surge into the fortress. Reitz and Mary stormed the courtyard and cut down resistance with swift precision. The defending commander quickly realized the situation was hopeless and surrendered. Reitz told him flatly that he had made the correct decision. Then the strange boy seen earlier stepped forward. "My name is Burham," he declared. "I'll fight." The commander tried to restrain him, but Burham shoved him aside, insisting he was the strongest warrior in the castle. He defeated several soldiers effortlessly, then turned to Reitz and issued a challenge. Reitz accepted. Burham attacked with overwhelming raw power, but no structure. Reitz evaded smoothly, conserving movement, reading each swing before it landed. "Strength without thought is dull," Reitz said. "Relying only on power leads nowhere." Burham grew furious and charged harder. Within moments, Reitz knocked him down and began correcting him mid-fight. "Adjust your footing, control your center, read your opponent." Ars observed quietly and activated his appraisal skill. Low intelligence parameter, high physical stats. With proper training, Burham could one day surpass Reitz. Ars spoke calmly. "A true warrior never stops learning. Power without discipline won't make you a soldier." Burham pushed himself up. Suddenly, he bowed slightly. "Master," he said to Reitz, asking to become his disciple. Reitz hesitated. "Accept an enemy as a student?" Ars intervened. Recruiting him would be a strategic gain. And if anyone could refine that raw talent, it was Reitz. After explaining his position under Ars, Reitz waited for Burham's decision. The boy considered it briefly, then acknowledged him as his master, though he added confidently that he intended to surpass him someday. With no real reason to refuse, Reitz accepted him. Mary watched with interest. There was something unusual about Burham, untamed but promising. At that moment, several soldiers recognized Mary. Whispers spread. The torture demon. They remembered battles where she had broken hardened warriors without mercy. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Resistance faded. One by one, the remaining defenders dropped their weapons and begged for mercy instead of continuing the fight. At the same time, Clement's unit fully secured the southern gate. Kuran's forces poured in and took control of Stowe Castle. The enemy commander escaped, but the outcome was decided. The war had entered its final stage. Before the assembled soldiers, Kuran publicly praised Ars, stating that his movements had been the decisive factor in the castle's fall. Later, Ars went to Kuran's chamber. Some guards watched him with restrained suspicion, but Kuran dismissed it and commended his achievements despite his youth. Then he asked him directly whether he was hiding something. His instincts told him that Ars's judgment was unusual and that he possessed an uncanny ability to identify talent. Ars understood this wasn't casual curiosity. He answered calmly that he was only a lord seeking a peaceful world. He didn't fully understand the source of his abilities, but he intended to use them to protect his people. Kuran affirmed his trust, yet admitted that some of his followers viewed Ars's rapid rise as a growing threat. The message was clear. Influence gained quickly invites suspicion. Ars left more cautious than before. A snowball struck him. Jane stood nearby, laughing. It was the first time she had seen snow, and she wanted to play. Reet stared at her in disbelief until another snowball hit him. She called Graham to join. Within minutes, the courtyard turned into a snow battle. Even X joined in, proposing wagers. Team Reets or Team Jane? Clement stayed out of it. Mary challenged him to a drinking contest instead, and he accepted without hesitation. Nearby, Zayn built a large snowman, only for Reets to crash into it and knock it down. Zayn looked annoyed. They rebuilt it, larger than before, as scattered laughter filled the air. Some soldiers complained that the wagers hadn't been settled and demanded their money back from X. He answered by vanishing into shadow before anyone could grab him. As the day ended, Jane said quietly that she hoped they could spend the next winter together, without war. No one objected. At the same time, Thomas began to realize something unsettling. Mary had been reading his moves before he even executed them. For the first time, doubt crept into his mind. X appeared beside him and asked calmly why he wasn't acting like his usual self. The memory pulled him backward. Long chess matches, endless hours across the board. Thomas against Mary. Edward Grandin had once observed that both were strategic prodigies, but the balance always tilted in her favor. No matter how many variations Thomas calculated, she was already ahead. He tried again and again to surpass her. He never did. She became the Duke's chief advisor. He remained in the background. Then everything changed. Mary was suddenly exiled. Thomas was appointed in her place. For the first time, he felt victorious, not because he had defeated her on the board, but because he had remained loyal to the Duke, just as his father had. Back in the present, X informed Thomas that Kuran's army would soon move toward Balad. The next phase was approaching. Thomas acknowledged that Mary's presence beside Kuran gave them a clear advantage. Still, X didn't blame him for recent setbacks. Loyalty, he said, was Thomas's greatest strength, just like his father's. Then he added something more personal. They were alike. Both of them were fighting to protect their father's legacies by bringing down Kuran, and X was relying on him completely. Elsewhere, Kuran was briefing his commanders when a soldier entered, announcing the arrival of a messenger from Balad. The envoy carried a proposal. A truce. Lord K had sent it. Kuran rejected the idea immediately. In his view, only a weaker side asks for peace. But the messenger warned him that refusal would lead to heavy losses. Then he revealed something more alarming. The mages of Beliza had developed a weapon capable of destroying an entire city. They didn't wish to use it. Civilians would suffer, but they would if the truce was denied. Kuran requested time and called an emergency council. Mary spoke first. The threat was likely psychological warfare, meant to force concessions. Most commanders doubted such a weapon even existed. After brief deliberation, Kuran refused the offer and ordered the envoy removed. Once the meeting ended, Zayn wondered aloud what Thomas was truly planning. Mary said she didn't know, but Zayn had noticed something. Thomas had begun asking about her, about their past connection, as if there was history between them beyond the battlefield. It wasn't only rivalry. They shared the same talent, strategy, and neither had forgotten it. Elsewhere, Edward Grandin was arrested on charges of treason. He insisted on his innocence, but the commander informed him that witnesses had testified against him and that the execution order had already been signed. The Grandin family would be stripped of their noble title. The decision was final. Edward made one last request. If his sons could not be elevated, then they should be executed with him. Their talents, he argued, might one day become a threat to Meishan if they served another duke. He was led away in chains. Thomas was convinced of his innocence. He knew Edward's loyalty to the Duke. Mary, however, showed no sympathy. The Duke had never listened to Edward's warnings before, and he wouldn't start now. Soon after, Thomas and Mary were stripped of their noble ranks and reduced to commoners. Mary considered survival itself a victory. Edward's mistake, in her view, was failing to flee when he still could. Thomas struggled with the humiliation, but she reminded him that intellect and influence could outweigh any title. Back in the present, Mary revealed that she and Thomas had entered a military academy simply to survive. They became strategic planners. Even then, Thomas saw her not as a partner, but as the rival who always stayed one step ahead. At Belize Castle, Thomas prepared to depart. He was warned against moving without reinforcements, but he declared that his loyalty to X outweighed caution. This time, he would defeat Mary. On the other side, Coran received a report that the so-called superweapon had appeared on the hills of Belzud. Tension rose immediately. Mary said it looked like deception. The Shadow unit was sent to investigate. X reached the site and inspected the mechanism. There was no active water-based mana channel feeding it. The weapon was a facade. He returned with the report. Ars informed the commanders that the threat was false. Zane raised the question, why would Thomas deploy a fake weapon? Ars recalled an earlier battle when Mary had feigned surrender to release false information and lure the enemy into a trap. Thomas was attempting the same structure of deception now. Mary agreed. The weapon wasn't the objective, it was the setup. Zane re-examined the map. The nearby forest was the most likely ambush point. Coran ordered the advance and authorized burning the area if necessary. Mary's expression didn't waver. This time, she wouldn't allow Thomas to outmaneuver her. Deep within the forest, Thomas had positioned his forces before Coran's army arrived. Explosives were planted between the trees, and his men confirmed that everything was ready. Then he revealed the full plan. Their numbers were limited. The explosions alone wouldn't decide the battle. They would strike during the chaos. When the forest ignited and visibility collapsed, it was a high-risk assault. If anyone wishes to withdraw, do it now, he said. No one moved. He remembered a conversation with X about his father, Edward. X had once admitted that Edward's execution had been a mistake, that the Empire had lost a rare talent. That day, Thomas swore loyalty to X and promised victory, whatever the cost. He looked at his men again. They understood the risk. Many wouldn't return. Still, they stayed. He began the countdown. Outside the forest, Coran's forces assembled. He preferred to capture Thomas alive. A strategist like him was more valuable breathing than dead. A mage prepared a large-scale fire spell to ignite the forest, but Zane sensed something off. The setup felt wrong. He stopped the incantation seconds before release. Inside the trees, Thomas frowned. Why hadn't the flames begun? A stray fireball landed near his position. His men tensed. Then arrows rained from the flanks. They charged forward to break the encirclement, but Burham arrived with reinforcement units, and the clash erupted instantly. Thomas understood. The trap had been exposed. He scanned the battlefield and spotted Coran. Eliminating him could still shift the outcome. He surged through the lines with force, cutting down anyone in his path. From a distance, Ars activated appraisal. Coran's combat rating was high, but prolonged engagement against Thomas's momentum could wear him down. Thomas closed in. Without thinking, Ars moved to intercept, even knowing he was weaker. The strike nearly reached him, but Reitz intervened and knocked Thomas aside with a decisive maneuver. Soldiers rushed to restrain him. He broke free briefly, only to realize his forces were already retreating. Then Mary stepped forward. Thomas glared at her. He had lost again. She spoke evenly. His plan had been precise. This time, it wasn't her who had seen through it. It was Zane. Thomas was stunned. Zane had no personal history with him. Zane explained calmly. He had studied Thomas's previous operations. A strategist who knows he is being watched often seeks the perfect counter-strike. Therefore, a counter-trap was likely. Mary called Thomas reckless. Through appraisal, Ars noticed something else. Her emotional state wasn't stable. She masked it well. He asked her to be honest. After a brief pause, she admitted it. This round hadn't been her victory. If not for Zane's red, her miscalculation might have cost them. Mary told Thomas that he was a brilliant strategist. Relief crossed his face. He had waited years to hear those words from her. At last, he admitted defeat. Coran offered him a place at his side. Thomas refused. He had sworn loyalty to X and would not betray him. Coran ordered his imprisonment. He then praised Zane for dismantling the strategy and warned him not to follow Mary's thinking blindly without independent judgment. Soon after, Beliza Castle surrendered. Coran thanked the army and declared that they now controlled 2 of the 3 major cities. He began appointing new governors. Lumiere would govern Belzud. Loba would govern Samek. Jane asked who would take Kanier. Coran explained that Lumiere could not hold both positions. Then he named Ars as Lord of Kanier. Cagnier. The weight of it struck him immediately. He wondered if he was ready. Some nobles objected to his youth, others countered by listing his achievements in the war. His followers stood firmly behind him. Amid celebration, Ars accepted the position. Later, he spoke privately with Lumiere. The promotion did not bring him full satisfaction. Leaving Cagnier weighed on him. Belzoud held greater political importance, but Cagnier was personal. He told Ars he trusted him to govern it well, and asked him to make it better than before. Ars promised he would. When Ars returned to Lampert, he was welcomed warmly. Yet he noticed a family mourning their son who had fallen in battle. They thanked him for the letter describing their son's bravery, and told him not to grieve for them. The victory had been built on such sacrifices. Then Litia ran to him. She had missed him. His family welcomed him home, but something unusual stirred in the air. The church bells rang. Servants guided him forward. His companions understood before he did. Hammond entered and informed him that the wedding ceremony was ready. Licia appeared in her bridal dress. For a moment, he was speechless. Even the toy merchant released rose petals from his ship above the square. The celebration began. Laughter filled the town. Still, Ars knew the peace was fragile. War had ended, but its scars remained. He told Licia he would give everything to protect them and build a safer world. She answered simply that she would stand beside him every step of the way. And here the story concludes. If you enjoyed it and wish to see another tale, share your thoughts. Your support means everything. Until the next story.